Okay, this is the third time I press record this video, so let's get it started. Quick and fast, fast and furious, whatever. Released on Netflix in 2018, the legacy of a white-tailed deer hunter follows Buck Ferguson, a star of television, a star of television hunting shows, on a hunting trip with his son Jaden. Joining them is Don, Buck's longtime cameraman. To me, this is a fairly ordinary family comedy. It is not even the kind of movie I would normally seek out. I only click on it because it had Montana Jordan and Josh Brolin in it. But the more I watched, the more I found to appreciate much of it having to do with the way much of it having to do with the way the film tells a story that is about family, um, that is about as familiar as they come. You would wait that the kind of movie that the kind of film that you could wave your hand around and come up with a whole pile of movie just like it. But it turned out to be a really interesting case study. But but it turned out to be a really interesting case study in screenwriting, especially for anyone learning how to tell story and write. Learn how to tell stories and write for the screen. The first, the first thing that caught my attention was the way the film built its character. Dawn is introduced primarily as a sort of comedy relief, and Danny McBride presents only for that function. And about 8 minutes in, about 8 minutes in, while the three of them, while the three of them are sitting in the car, Dawn starts making cruel jokes to Jaden about masturbation, going on about the woman who are supposedly joining them on the trip and getting increasingly graphic. Book immediately tell him to cut it out because they have already agreed not to talk about sexual stuff. That one short exchange is enough to establish Don as the kind of guy who is so carefree that he becomes obnoxious, constantly saying things that inappropriate situation and having a little sense of where the line is. So later, so later, when Don showed Jaden explicit picture of his girlfriend participating in an orgy, the act is certainly shocking, but it never felt to me. I thought the film, but it never felt to me that I thought the film has suddenly bent the character in a completely different direction. The film never specifically tell us that Don. Well, okay. The film never specifically tell us that Don is going to do something like that, but it had already shown us that he is the kind of person who might do that. I also appreciate that the film does not turn Don into a full-time clown. For the most part, he serves as the bridge between Jaden and Buck, a guy who is so carried that he becomes tactless, constantly joking about masturbation and women, and tells Jaden things that are hardly appropriate for a kid. But Dawn and Buck have their own unresolved issues too, and those issues are not immediately laid bare. As a result, we gradually begin to see Dawn as a person with his story and a relationship with Buck rather than one-dimensional character whose only purpose is to get laughs. This is only the thing that makes the film feel more de- deliberately, de- 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 delight, deliberate, deliberately, deli- deli- deliberately deliberately constructed at it in each of what am initially appear. Okay. A clear example is the story. A clear example is the story John Don tells Jaden about first time he went filming with Buck. Don had forgotten to bring the proper footwear and the higher they climbed, the colder it got. Eventually, he could not take it anymore and asked Buck to turn back. But Buck refused and instead made Don feel guilty for wanting to give up. So Don grit his teeth and kept rolling and keep rolling. Buck ended up killing a deer. The footage from that trip became so sad for them, and Don lost his big toe for frostbite. The injury left him with trouble keeping his balance when he walked. What I find interesting is that a few minutes before Don tell this story, the film had already shown him walking and sleeping and hitting his forehead hard enough to bleed. It is only when Don tell Jaden about losing his toe that we understand why he have been having trouble. That that he that we understand why he had been having trouble walking. It is a small detail, and the early fall is not even present as a particularly important movement, but it shows that the film knows how to hold on to information and review it at the right moment instead of explaining everything as soon as it appears. Don tells Jaden that he lost his big toe to frostbite, and when Jaden reacts in shock, Don casually explained that the injury left him with a bit of balance problem. He then brushed the whole thing off and, in his usual joking manner, he is not telling the story to blame Bud. Quite the opposite. He used it to explain why Bud had always had the point. Why Bud want people to push themselves beyond their limit and why Jaden should try to understand him. But about 10 minutes later, Don showing Jaden the explicit pictures of his girlfriend led to an argument between Don and Buck. One thing led to another, and Don brings up the missing toe again, but this time he calls Buck a selfish asshole and decides he is done going along with him. The same event from the past taking on a different meaning as the relationship between the two men changed. It is not merely a callback. The detail was planned early and then brought back at the right moment to create conflict and reveal more about the relationship between the two characters. One of the things that makes me so enthusiastic about becoming the legacy of a white-tailed deer hunter as a case of study, as a case study is the way the film keeps introducing these small details. They do not necessarily have to tell us exactly what is going to happen later. What matters is that when something does happen, it feels plausible for the people we have been introduced to. And Don showing Jaden the explicit pictures is one sample. Don losing his toes is another sample. For sure that both show that a film does not need to make its character comically predictable, but it just simply need to make sure the action not feel absurd of the character. Uh, the, that do not feel absurd or out of character. Okay.